The Minister is responsible for immigration, which is an important file. In fact, many say it's the future of economic development, and this province depends on immigration. Huge file. Minister of Opportunities, New Brunswick. One of the priorities the Premier laid out yesterday here in the House was for regional economic development. So huge responsibility with Opportunities, New Brunswick. Minister for Economic Development and Small Business, another big responsibility, given that small business is the backbone, as many say, of our, certainly Greens say this, backbone of our economy. And then Aboriginal Affairs. So it gives me great concern about the capacity to deliver on the mandate of the department, with the minister having many other very big responsibilities for very other important departments. Say, well, maybe the deputy minister can make up the difference in time. But, well, the deputy minister is responsible for environment and climate change. We've got a climate crisis. It's one of the, after COVID, one of the biggest crises we're facing today. Intergovernmental affairs, huge issues with Ottawa, other provinces, New England states, other countries we have relations with on tourism, on arts, on culture, on trade. There's also the Deputy Minister for the Regional Development Corporation, which is important in terms of regional development and community development, and Deputy Minister for Aboriginal Affairs. So you mentioned that, the Minister mentioned that the budget has increased slightly, and part of that increase reflects hiring a special assistant to the Minister. How is that person going to make up the difference in terms of the capacity of the department at the senior levels, with yourself and your deputy having a much smaller percentage of time available? And it's not just time, but as we all know, when you're dealing with multiple major issues that are quite different, it's not an easy thing to switch back and forth. I know the Premier has tremendous faith in both public servants, as he should, and his cabinet, as he should. But you know, we're only human. So it's positive that you identify the need for a special assistant, but maybe you could explain what their mandate will be and how that, whether you see that as adequate or not in terms of making up the shortfalls that have resulted in losing a full-time minister and a full-time deputy.
Thank you to the member opposite for the question. And through the chair, and I think this is a very valid question. Unfortunately, we don't know each other well, but I'll give you a bit of my own background with respect to my previous profession. So I started out in the province of New Brunswick running the Labourers International Union, represented about 3,500 members. I moved to the province of Newfoundland to run a $15 billion oil platform build, look after the Hebron project as well as Muskrat Falls and Long Harbour. From there I moved to the city of Ottawa to eventually become the national voice of the skilled trades in Canada, representing 550,000 folks throughout our great country. And I can assure you, all of these files were part of that work. In addition to those files, I could probably name 10 other files that I was responsible for. And I would say to you today that, and you can probably see while you're here, that we have a staff that is second to none. Our staff works long hours. They're very diligent. And I would also want you to think about the fact that it's very important that we identify the synergies across departments. And I think sometimes folks may think it's better for individual departments or portfolios to kind of exist in a silo. But it's been my experience representing people across this great nation. And these are folks that are Aboriginal. These are folks who care about economic development. They care about small business. They're looking for opportunities, and I could go on. These are new Canadians. And I think it's really important for us as a government here in the province of New Brunswick to understand that this integration is really impactful and very beneficial. And I can tell you, in working with my staff and across departments, there's a lot of synergy. And while we have this integration, it allows us to actually identify gaps and to identify opportunities. And when we identify a gap, we can fill that gap because we have that synergy and that communication across all those departments. And at the same token, when we see an opportunity, we can build on that opportunity to make everyone in this province more prosperous. So thank you for the question.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the Minister, could the Minister particularly detail the responsibilities of the Special Assistant to the Minister that she's hiring, and will they be exclusively focused on Aboriginal affairs?
And thank you again to the member opposite. The Special Assistant is actually working with me now, and her job is to support me in terms of my portfolio, and that would be all of my portfolios. Thank you.
Well, Mr. Chair, my concern remains then that we have a minister with multiple departments to be in charge of, a deputy minister with multiple departments to be responsible for, and when it comes to Aboriginal affairs, we're talking about the need to manage the treaty relationship between government and First Nation governments. In fact, 3 First Nation governments in the province, along with the individual band governments, traditional councils, women's councils, elders councils, and a treaty relationship which defines the legal basis of our relationship and has since the treaties were signed. So I do not understand why this budget would not include a significant increase in funds for bringing on additional people power at the senior level to ensure that the department can fulfill its mandate. Additional assistant deputy ministers or its own deputy minister. Why is the minister not budgeted for, say, bringing on a singular deputy minister? I know that her current deputy is capable of many things, and I'm always impressed by the public service and what public servants achieve for our province. But again, we're only human. I know how to work. Ask anybody. But I don't think I would take on what either of you have taken on to enable to do justice to any of these portfolios. So why has the minister not budgeted in this budget for bringing on additional capacity to ensure that her department can fulfill its responsibilities?
Thank you again to the member opposite for the question, and through the chair, first of all, thank you for the concern. I appreciate that. And I would say that we have significant bench strength, and I do rely on staff from all of the departments to assist me with respect to my work. And so far it's worked quite well. But I would also add that at some juncture, if I feel that there's a necessity, then I certainly have no issue with respect to moving forward and asking for additional capacity. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, but the minister says it's working out well, but there at this point appears to be virtually no relationship between First Nation governments in this province and the minister in this government. So I don't think it's working out so well. But let me move on to another area of questioning. So with respect to, I've got to say what the member previously said about the communities in her riding. I've spent time in all 3, more recently only in 2 out of the 3. I haven't been in Escadovich for a while, but they're beautiful places, beautiful people, warm and welcoming. When I think of Metapanagaeg, I think of baseball because Chief Bill, last time I was there, was telling me about how baseball has come back to Metapanagaeg. It's a long history of baseball there. And I just thought this summer, I got to go there and sit in the stands watch a ball game in Metapanage. Wouldn't that be
Maybe we'll
great?
play.
Yeah, people will play. That would be comedy. That wouldn't be baseball. But we could try it. Just sorry about the tangent, but just brought back some good memories. In the budget, there's this $500,000 increase in the department's budget. Now, is that also paying for the commissioner and the commissioner's work on systemic racism in New Brunswick, or is that those funds coming from somewhere else, and if so, where?
Oh, sorry. Is that better? Yep. Okay, great. Thank you for the question to the member opposite, and through the chair, the $500,000 budget with respect to systemic racism is actually under post-secondary education, training, and labor. Thank you.
I'm sorry, did I hear that right, through you, Mr. Chair, that you said it's under pedal, the budget for yes, she's nodding, okay. So it's under pedal, interesting. With respect to systemic racism, just trying to get at the role of your department here a little bit too, with regards to what's funded. So if Indigenous people are experiencing racism in different parts of an agency or a department across the province, have been a target of harassment because they're Indigenous, or double harassment because they're Indigenous and women, where do they go? Can they come to your department and register a complaint and ask for some kind of intervention?
Through the chair, and thank you again to the member opposite for the question. If we were to receive a complaint with respect to harassment or someone that's been targeted with respect to racism and they came to our department, we would never turn them away. However, we would ensure that we gave them advice with respect to which department and where they needed to go to be properly served. And that could be the ombudsman, it could be human rights, but definitely would assist them. Thank you.
So the more appropriate place, you're saying, would be for Indigenous people to take their complaints or experience of racism to the Ombudsman or the Human Rights Commission, or both. Is that correct?
Once again, through the chair, thank you to the member opposite. I would say that there are departments that are properly mandated to address these issues, and they have the wherewithal and the mandate to do so. So it would be important for us to direct them to those departments. Thank you.
With respect to, well, what are we calling it? The consultation, I guess, on systemic racism. It's a very painful thing, I would imagine. I have to imagine because, well, look at me, you know, I'm a privileged white man. And I have to imagine that it could be a very painful thing for someone to come forward to speak to a commissioner about their experience with racism within the system, whether it's justice or education or whatever it might be. And maybe they would find it virtually impossible to do so. So what I'm wondering is whether there will be provisions in the budget, your budget, to ensure Indigenous people can have the capacity to participate, so that, you know, if someone needs to bring someone in to work with them to put together their testimony, so that it can be done properly and they can trust it goes forward in good hands, but because of their experience they're just not capable or able to follow through. Will there be funding to provide capacity for First Nations people to participate?
Through the chair, and thank you again to the member opposite for the question, and I would agree with you, racism for anyone who has experienced it, which we can't speak of. I can only speak about my own experience being married to a man of color and what I've seen throughout my 30 years of marriage and raising a biracial daughter. It's very sad, and you're absolutely right. People don't want to come forth, and their stories can be very compelling. We would definitely ensure that the assistance would be there. Thank you.
Through the chair to the minister, thank you very much. That's good to know, and I think quite appropriate. Just shifting gears a little bit, one of the big conversations in the country has been around incorporating the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People into Canadian law. It's been done in British Columbia. It was the recommendation of the Truth and Reconciliation Commissioner, call to action for all provinces to do so. I'm wondering, within your budget, I mean, a $500,000 increase in the grand scheme of things isn't very much, but is there money allocated to carry out the kind of analysis about how to onboard the UN Declaration on Indigenous rights of Indigenous people into New Brunswick law? Is there a budget there for you your department to develop that and make recommendations?
Thank you to the member opposite for the question, and through the chair, I understand that there's been significant work underway going on for the last year with respect to ONDRIP. GNB has undertaken a technical compliance review of ONDRIP to better understand how it might be implemented as a framework for reconciliation in New Brunswick. A technical compliance review involves an interdepartmental review of legislation, programs, and policies to determine the extent to which they meet the standards set by the given instrument. The results of the technical compliance review will be shared with government very soon. To fully adopt and implement the declaration as the framework for reconciliation requires thoughtful analysis of other conventions with the declaration, as well as in the context of the Canadian Constitution. So to answer your question, the work has been going on for about a year. There's been no additional monies set aside for that particular work. It's coming out of the existing funds. Thank you.
Thanks to the minister. Through the chair, will the results of that review be provided to First Nation leaders and then more broadly to the public?
Through the chair, and thank you again for the question to the member opposite, I understand that this work has been going on for a while, and it is imminent in terms of being produced, the document. There's been no discussion yet at this particular juncture with respect to whether that document is going to be shared. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Chair, through you as minister, then when will you ensure that that discussion occurs to arrive at a decision as to whether it will be provided to First Nation leaders or not?
Thank you once again to the member opposite, and through the chair, I understand, as I said previously, this work is continuing and will be hopefully wrapping up very soon. The understanding would be that following this technical compliance review, there would be a summation composed. And although I'm not in the situation today to speak for government, I would suggest firmly that that be shared with the public as well as First Nations. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to move on to some questions around, which I expect takes some staff time, and therefore budget, which is the department's role at consultation tables. I understand there are a number of consultation tables that exist. How many would the department be involved with, and what's the actual role for the department at the consultation table?
Again, to the member opposite for the question, and through the chair, I guess we're going to require some clarification with respect to your question. Are you referring specifically to consultation tables or negotiation tables? Thank you.
I'm referring, Mr. Chair, specifically to consultation tables, yes.
Through the chair, and thank you again to the member opposite for the question. I understand that currently there are no consultation tables. However, there are negotiation tables, bilateral as well as tripartite negotiation tables with all 3 nations. Thank you.
Okay, in that case then, let me, since I understood there were consultation tables, but if there are not, I'll ask the same question regarding the negotiation tables. Is your department present, and what is its role in the negotiation tables?
Through the chair, and thank you again to the member opposite for the question. I understand that we have the mandate to negotiate on behalf of the government of Brunswick in consultation with the respective departments. So some of the key things that we're negotiating, looking at right now is that we would actually discuss with First Nations and negotiate our high-level principles-based framework agreements, archaeology agreements, the moose harvesting agreement, plus the deer harvesting as well. Mandate for lands and resources strategic planning table, forestry bilateral table, and once again archaeological bilateral table and processing of established practices. A framework agreement related to parks, wildlife, and general negotiations is proceeding. Thank you.
Thank you. Does your department draw on your budget to provide cultural sensitivity and treaty education to 1, government departments, and 2, to the general public?
To the member opposite, thank you again for the question, and through the chair, I understand as part of our operational budget that we've been developing cultural awareness modules, and we anticipate that they'll be completed by the end of this fiscal. Also, we encourage all departments to ensure that they get cultural awareness training for their staff, and that is covered by the departments. And also, there is a list of external resources that's available on our website with respect to cultural awareness training. Thank you.
To just clarify then, Mr. Chair, through you to the Minister, these cultural awareness modules are designed for whom?
And thank you again to the member opposite for the question. I understand that they were developed in conjunction and collaboration with First Nations leadership as well as elders. And these particular modules, as I said, should be available by the end of this fiscal. And GNB staff currently have access to this information, and the intent would be to provide this information moving forward to GNB staff as well once they're completed. Thank you.
Thank you. We are on Wolastoqey territory here, and I'm wondering whether there is time allocated in your budget for this coming year to ensure that the name of the river, the Wolastoq, is restored on all government documents and publicity materials.
Through the chair, and thank you again to the member opposite, I understand that this is actually tourism's file. However, I will let you know that they're in the process of trying to put together a toponymy committee, and they've been working on this for a while. So I would suggest that perhaps that we could get further details from tourism, culture, and heritage. Thank you.
One of the things, Mr. Chair, that our universities have been doing is trying to indigenize their campuses, which is an awful term. It sounds terrible, but that's the word that gets used. And in thinking of government, I'm wondering whether the department is budgeting any efforts in this direction for government to make it concrete, but straightforward, like flying the flags of the 3 First Nations within New Brunswick, the Passamaquoddy, the Wolastoq, when they make them outside the Legislative Assembly, that we don't, and making sure they appear at press conferences behind ministers and the Premier when they're speaking. It's a very straightforward example, but obviously if this were budgeted in the department, they would look government-wide to see what measures should be taken. and who to recommend who to sort of bring in for advice. Thank you.
Thank you again to the member opposite for the question, and through the chair, I understand that we provide funding to partner with tourism on purchasing Indigenous art, which is on display throughout many government offices. Also, we do actually fly the Indigenous flags on special celebration days for Indigenous folks. One of them would be the Indigenous Peoples Day, which, as you know, is in June. Further to that, there's a number of recommendations that we're looking at right now under the TRC work that we're doing, and one of those would be to continue to advance the cultural awareness modules and that training as well. But we do expect that there's going to be further work with respect to this initiative. Thank you.
Finally, because of COVID last year, powwows couldn't occur. St. Mary's across the river here puts on an amazing powwow, as do other First Nation communities around the province. I've been to many. I guess the question with regards to your budget is, have you made any particular consideration within your budget to enable First Nation communities to host their powwows this year, to be compliant with public health rules and COVID safe and all of that, so that they can occur?
Through the chair, and thank you again to the member opposite for the question. I understand that through our small grants program, we actually do fund a number of powwow initiatives throughout the province. Thank you.
Just to follow up, Mr. Chair, on that question, then, it really is, there would be additional costs, I expect, to be COVID compliant if public health says that powwows can go ahead under certain circumstances. So will there be additional monies to make sure that can happen if it's possible?
Through the chair, and thank you again to the member opposite, I understand that this request would be taken into consideration. Thank you.
I said that was my final question, Mr. Chair, but I do have one more, and that is is there any role that the department is playing in the coming year to support the Passamaquoddy Nation in New Brunswick, Scoodic, in their efforts to finalize recognition with the federal government?
Thank you again to the member opposite for the question, and through the chair, I understand that we set at a tripartite table with the federal government. Recognition is a federal responsibility and mandate. We are working with the Passamaquoddy Nation on other interests, the moose and the deer interests that I referred to earlier. And we also provided $50,000 in funding in this fiscal for upcoming negotiations around capacity building. Thank you.
Thank you for that answer. That's good. The Passamaquoddy Nation is in New Brunswick is in a strange situation where obviously they're a nation of people who are beneficiaries of the treaties, as the Supreme Court has repeatedly found, of course, but they're still seeking to restore the official recognition from the federal government, as you all know. Thank you for, through the chair, for your responses, and to your staff for their assistance today.